Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 15 of the Credit You Deserve podcast. I'm your host, David Murphy, president of Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union, and today I'm going to be joined by our marketing guru, Breanna Butler, to have a discussion about the latest Don't Tax My Credit Union campaign that's going on nationwide. So thanks for joining, Breanna.
Yeah, happy to be here, especially because you always call me a guru when I come on, so.
Well, hey, I'm all about building up everyone around me, so it's all good.
Yeah, so this is an important topic, and I think it's something that a lot of people maybe don't know a lot about or realize that they can let their voice be heard in regards to it. So let's start at the beginning. MMCCU's been around since 1965. It was born from the credit union movement's tax-exempt roots. Can you explain why Congress gave credit unions this break back in 1934 and how it set the stage for the credit union here?
Yeah, absolutely. So historical context would be that the first credit union in the United States was introduced in 1909 over in the New England area, and that model was actually carried over from Europe. And so to take you back to those times, banks were in the business, of course, as they are today, of making profits, but what that meant was that they were not serving the underserved. They didn't call it that back in the day, but the people who were not well represented, maybe the people who didn't have much wealth to their name. And so there was a need for another institution to step up to basically band together for individuals to gain access to the financial services to fulfill their financial needs. And so credit unions started, again, back in Europe, and then the model was brought over here to the United States. Fast forward to the Great Depression with the 1919 market crash, and then into the 1920s, and same thing, banks were there just to serve the wealthier individuals. Were not stepping up to help the people who basically lost everything with the market crash. And so credit unions really popped up across the country in the 20s. In fact, tidbit here, Wisconsin's first credit union actually was founded in 1923 down in Milwaukee area. So we've had credit unions in the state for over 100 years as well. In 1934, then, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the Federal Credit Union Act, in which legislation was built to support the credit union movement. And within that legislation, the credit union industry was cemented their tax-exempt status. And the reason that was given was really because of an appreciation and an identification that credit unions were there serving the underserved, were representing those who didn't get their needs met by the larger banks that were, again, for-profit institutions. And so Congress recognized the fight that credit unions were engaging in and the good that they were doing for the economy. And so fast forward 90 some years later, and credit unions are still living by that mission of serving the underserved, serving those who are in financial peril and in financial need. And so, the credit union being around since 1965, we started as St. Joseph's Hospital Employees Credit Union. We had 75 individuals that worked at the hospital who joined together at that first meeting, who, through the Wisconsin Credit Union League, formed the Hospital Employees Credit Union. And so since over the last 60 years, again, as many credit unions do, started in like a shoebox, basically collected some funds from some of the individuals who were there and wanted to join the credit union. And from those funds, then they gave their first loan out. Another fascinating tidbit, I guess, would be that the first loan granted by the credit union was for $75. So it wasn't, again, that's serving the underserved and serving those smaller needs. But fast forward 60 years later, or almost 60 years later, and the credit union continues to abide by that same model, where we're here to engage our community and serve individuals who may not necessarily get the access to services that they would from like other financial institutions.
So even though you are a lot bigger, giving out loans probably for more than $75, that no tax is still a crucial component of what you do day to day for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fact that we as a financial cooperative and a non-for-profit financial cooperative at that are not federally taxed when it comes to like income tax, we're able to take those funds and A, reinvest them in our communities. B, it means that we don't have to charge exorbitant rates or fees on like loans or just on deposit accounts. We're able to pay more or competitive rates back on deposits. And so if we were required to pay federal income tax, um, a lot of institutions would struggle to survive first and foremost. B, a lot of those institutions that would survive, they would have to take some of those funds that they are redeploying back into their communities, and they would have to send it basically to the government. And so it would change the model in which credit unions would operate ultimately.
So what would you say to, let's say, a bank that's saying that MMCCU as a credit and other credit unions don't deserve a tax advantage because you're competitors? How do you see MMCCU standing apart from after all these years?
I would say, so I'm going to speak to the credit union space as a whole, but even specific to Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union, our credit union, again, it being in the business of serving healthcare workers, we really have this opportunity to provide affordable living costs through lower rates and less fees and everything with for healthcare workers and their ability to manage their finances. And it's not that necessarily, we should probably we should probably specify a little bit that there are a lot of community banks that are doing a lot of similar things that what credit unions are doing. They are investing in their communities. And so a lot of the pushback, if you will, when it comes to the taxation on credit unions does come from a lot of the larger banks, the national ones like your JP Morgan Chases, your Bank of Americas, your US banks, those players, because they understand that credit unions in existence keep them honest, because otherwise if there wasn't credit unions in the space, there wouldn't be that equalizer, if you will, within the market, and so they would be able to charge whatever rates because there wouldn't be a competitor that would undermine rates and fees and whatnot. And again, going back to that, what I said about what happened some 100 years ago, there still would be pockets of the country in which individuals would not have access to banking services. It's easy to think that in today's day and age, with the digital space being what it is, that everyone has access to whatever financial options they want. But take rural northern Wisconsin, for example, where internet access is hard to come by. They rely a lot more on those in-person branches. And as banks are identifying that some of these smaller markets are not profitable and they're pulling out of those markets, that's where you're seeing credit unions stepping in and filling those banking deserts. And so ultimately, yes, banks are saying, okay, well, that's an advantage that credit unions have because they don't have to pay tax. And that's true. But again, it's what we do with those savings. It's not just that it funnels through to the bottom line and we don't care about the communities and the people that we're serving, but ultimately we're taking those dollars that we're saving and we are redeploying them without having any regulation telling us that we need to do that.
Makes sense. So what's sparking this initiative now? Is the tax exemption really at risk? Because we're approaching our 60th anniversary here at MMCCU. That would be a major shift. And is this the first time that that's been challenged?
So it's not the first time that the credit union tax exemption has been on the table, so to speak. There has been a couple of times over the last decade or two which this topic has been up for discussion. Really, and again, I'm going to preface this next comment by saying this is not a political statement when I say this. It's just the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in, that with the change in the administration in both the White House and Congress, that there's a shift in the taxation of everything, really, when it comes down to the way that our tax model is set up. And so we're seeing a lot of discussion around the tax jobs and the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Sorry, I said that wrong the first time, but
close enough.
So with that, and what that means is that if that is extended, then of course Congress is saying, okay, well, we can't afford, or we potentially can't afford just to axe all of these tax sources by giving all these tax cuts, so we need to find other sources to bring in more tax revenue. And so what ended up happening over the last couple of months is that House Republicans did float the idea that pretty much every source of potential tax revenue is on the table, which the Federal Credit Union Act and the tax exemption that's afforded to credit unions was introduced in that document. It's not legislation or anything like that, but it is a document of things that are being looked at. And so basically, it's the old adage, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So yes, how serious it is, it depends on who you're asking. We were just out in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, and a lot of the legislators we would talk to support the credit union industry, support the tax exemption status that credit unions are afforded. However, there's also concern that this could be a last-second ad that really doesn't gain much discussion. It just would be like a late-night ad, and once that gets pushed through, then there really is no going back on that.
Okay, so for the average person listening to this, whether they're a member or a member of a credit union somewhere else, why should they care about this issue?
Well, if you like the services and the structure of your credit union, whether it is MMCCU or another credit union that you work with, if you enjoy the advantages of working with a credit union, those have the potential of going away or changing drastically should the tax exempt status go away ultimately. And so no one really knows for sure what it would look like if that tax exempt status does get pulled, but we know that there would have to be some drastic changes within the financial operations of a lot of our credit unions, and that would be ultimately a detriment to our member owners.
So what can listeners do right now if they want their voice to be heard about this issue?
Yeah, the best thing that we would ask anyone listening to this would be to reach out to your federal legislators. So actually, if you visit the website don'ttaxmycreditunion.org, and there is no apostrophe in don't for the URL, but that website has a lot of information about the credit union industry, about why this Don't Tax My Credit Union campaign is ongoing and why it's important. There also is the ability for you to submit letters to your federal legislators then based on where you live. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just here in Marshfield or in central Wisconsin, but wherever you're at, you're able to go out there, enter your address, enter your name, and it'll populate your legislators based on your address. And then you can send either a standard form letter to your legislator, or you can customize it if you want to. But that way, then that information is being shared with them, and you can spell out your reasons for supporting the credit union tax exemption in that letter.
So we've covered a lot of the benefits for members, the benefits for the credit union itself. What's the bottom line here as far as why is this such a big deal?
Well, ultimately, the tax exempt status again allows credit unions in the industry to do what they've been doing for the last 100+ years, which is to ultimately do what's best for our member owners. And so a lot of communities are, let's just face it, with what's going on the city level in some areas, taxation and the effects that are having on the citizens that live in those communities, there's not always funds that are going to some of these initiatives that are prevalent today, like homelessness or the food shortages that we're experiencing, or anything financial literacy is another piece. And so credit unions are helping to fill some of those needs. They're not necessarily solving the problem, but they are contributing to try to resolve those situations. And ultimately, if credit unions were to go away, or if they were to change that model drastically, it could have domino effects on the communities that they're serving in. And ultimately, again, I mentioned earlier that credit unions help keep the banking industry honest. It's hard to say, I'm not going to sit here and tell you with 100% certainty that that would drastically change, but without having that competitor that kind of evens out the field, I suspect that it would be a lot easier and it would be more susceptible that banks would then change their model to, let's face it, make more profits, or aim to make more profits ultimately, which in this day and age with where the economy is at, that's the last thing that many of our citizens and lower earners can afford.
Anything else that we should let people know about this subject?
I think ultimately get in touch with your legislators, learn a little bit more about what your credit union is doing with this campaign, why it's important to them, and then ultimately, like I said, keep in mind that this has an impact on you as a member owner. Some people don't want to get involved with politics, and I completely understand why, because it is a polarizing subject. But again, this is not necessarily a left versus a right situation. No matter how it's painted in the media, or even who's messaging, who's issuing the messaging, I guess, from Congress and the White House, this really is an economic discussion ultimately. And so at the end of the day, if you support, one of the stats that is on the Don't Tax My Credit Union website is that 60% of Americans do support the credit union tax exemption, which is important to note. Again, that tax exemption helps us do what we're doing. And so it keeps credit unions competitive, but it also, again, it funnels down into more ways than just loans on the books or deposit accounts or what you're earning on those deposits. It's much bigger than that, and credit unions want to continue to be able to serve in that capacity.
Yeah, it really comes down to that credit union difference at the core of everything, and this fits right in with that. I think a lot of people don't maybe understand the difference between, we've talked about credit union versus bank, but this is a prime example of how a credit union is able to thrive, and I think without it, that would suffer. So
yeah, absolutely. It's very important for the credit union industry to continue to push for, or to maintain status quo, I guess, if you will, with the tax exemption, because ultimately that could be one of the biggest detrimental hits that the industry faces should we lose that tax exemption, because like I said, things will drastically change if that happens.
yeah, so contact your legislator and educate yourself by going to
don'ttaxmycreditunion.org, or you can visit the MMCCU website. We do have a little bit of information on our website as well, but even if you just Google Don't Tax My Credit Union, you'll find several publications that have talked about that. You will hear both sides of it. I would caution you that a lot of the op-ed pieces that are put out there by the banking side, they do stretch the truth when it comes to some of the facts and information that they contain in their op-eds as to what credit unions are doing with their tax exempt status. One of the things that gets pushed out there a lot is that credit unions don't pay any tax. That is debunked. We pay property taxes, we pay employment taxes, we pay a lot of the taxes the only tax really that we are exempt from is the federal income tax. So some of those pieces you do have to take a little bit with a grain of salt, but ultimately, get informed, and then we would just ask you to, again, reach out to your legislators and have that conversation. Whether it is just sending a letter in, if you're close enough to your legislator or comfortable enough to do so, give them a call. And again, this is a federal issue. It's not necessarily on the state level. Obviously, we would encourage anyone to reach out to your state legislators as well in support of credit unions, but really when it comes to this taxation matter, it's a federal issue. And so just reach out and make your voice be heard, ultimately.
Yeah, good message. Thanks for all the information. I think it's an important topic, and hopefully everyone listening out there takes the time to take some action.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you joining today and just asking some of these questions and having this dialogue so that we can better inform people, our listeners, and hopefully lead to keeping the tax exempt status as it is.
Anytime you call me a guru, I'll come in.
Perfect. I'll do it next time.
All
All right. Thanks, Breanna.
Yep.